Good evening and welcome to this evening's Power BI Manchester User Group for April. My name is Alex Taylor. I hope you're having a safe and well few weeks at home for COVID-19. Tonight's webinar, we've got two fantastic speakers, Laz and Rishi. I'm going to do a quick intro about them shortly, but first of all, just go through a few slides that you should be able to see now. So let me just go through it. So I run the Manchester Power BI User Group. It's been going for 3 years. We've got over 2,000 members on Meetup, over 5,000 followers on LinkedIn, and we get around 80 to 100 attendees per session when we can have face-to-face meetups, which will hopefully be not too distant future. As said, it's a fun interactive user group. We try and share demos with everyone, and it's a great practice that we put in place for the users across the Northwest. And thanks to doing webinars now, we're able to share our sessions far and wide. So we've got good testimonials, you can see, for Uber star ratings of about 4.6 out of 5 for our sessions. And I said I've got a good few reviews there. I'll quickly move on to the next session. About me, I'm a BI and data analytics recruiter with over 16 years industry experience. I head up the Rob Walters BI and data analytics and analytics team. So if you are looking for a new job, if your job situation has been affected, do get in touch with me. My details are below, or you can ping me a message via Meetup or LinkedIn. And I said, if you're a hiring manager and you are looking to recruit someone in the BI, data, or even IT space, don't hesitate to give me a shout. I'll be happy to help you and provide suitable candidates that are well qualified. Tonight's agenda, after my intro, it'll be Laz. I won't pronounce his surname, so apologies, Laz. And then at 7 o'clock we'll have Rishi, and we'll wrap up in time for everyone to get outside and clap the NHS outside their front doors. On the right hand side, you should be able to see a Q&A box, so please do add your questions, and whilst Laz is talking, myself and Rishi will endeavour to answer them, and if not, we'll push them to Laz so he can answer them when he gets a free moment. And then when Rishi's talking, myself and Laz will try our best to answer questions, but if we have more questions at the end, we will try and answer them before we close up, and if that means the live seminar goes on beyond 8 o'clock, we will stay on so people, when they return to their seats after the NHS clap, can see the answers. Quick info about Rishi. Rishi is an experienced BI consultant with over 15 years experience. He's an MVP from Microsoft. He's a chartered accountant, and his background in financial modelling and consulting, and he's highly recommended. I said he's been involved with various different events and speaking across the community, especially in London. He's spoken for myself twice now, and he is doing some other financial reporting seminars, so he'll be sharing those during his talk. Laz has 5 years experience. He works at Dartis. He's heavily engaged in the Power BI community, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his talk today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Laz.
Thank you, Alex.
How's it going, man? You all right?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
All right, good. Good luck, mate. I'll catch you later.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is Lazarus Viastikopoulos, and yes, that's quite a mouthful of a name, so everyone just calls me Laz. And I work for a data analytics consultancy called Adatis as the senior Power BI consultant. Now, I'm really excited to be presented today, and the main outcome of today's presentation is to go through the various approaches that we can take in order to roll out Power BI at an enterprise level. So hopefully by the end of today, whether you are rolling out Power BI or looking to roll out Power BI, you get some great insight from this presentation. So in this presentation, we're going to look at the common issues that large organizations are being faced with when initially rolling out Power BI. We're then going to look at the various different deployment approaches that we can follow in order to try and reduce these issues from occurring when rolling out Power BI. And then we're going to finish up on looking at some technical considerations. And what do I mean by the technical considerations? I mean at looking at the various different capabilities that make Power BI the enterprise ready platform it is today, And also, we're going to look at some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we are in the process of purchasing a Power BI premium capacity. So let's jump into it. So what are these common issues that large organizations are being faced with? Well, time and time again, we see and hear the same things being said. Why are these numbers different? How do I access this Power BI report? In which workspace does this, or in which workspace does this report belong to? What's the difference between a workspace and an app? How do I apply a slicer to this Power BI report? And even though the issues are many, as we can see from this slide, the funny thing is that they all seem to stem from the same place, and that is a lack of preparation and a lack of planning when initially rolling out Power BI. Now, many people see Power BI as a tool that can do it all due to its incredible growth in the market, its thriving community, and its updates on a monthly basis in various features as well. So I'm not surprised that many people have the mentality that this is the new big thing and it can solve all our issues. But unfortunately, nothing can solve all our issues, and what is required is a slow and planned approach. I think this image here highlights it very well. We love Power BI, we want Power BI, let's go ahead and roll it out to everyone. Now, we are asking for some trouble by following such an approach. So instead, we should choose a single team, a single department, maybe even a single function in the organization, and only roll out Power BI to that team or that department only. Identify the issues, and then reincorporate these issues back into the process, but this time with solutions, and only then roll out to another team, department, or function in the organization. So again, it comes down to having that slow and planned approach in place. Okay, so we have a good understanding of the common issues that organizations are being faced with. I'm sure many of you have experienced some of them as well yourselves. So how do we actually go ahead and reduce these issues from occurring when rolling out Power BI? Well, that's when the free Power BI deployment approaches come into play. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go ahead and describe each Power BI deployment approach on this slide. And then as we go through the presentation, we're then going to go into much more detail, but also look at the various factors that we should be considering when transitioning from one Power BI approach to the other. So the first is Corporate BI. Corporate BI is where the IT team or the BI team have full control and ownership of all the Power BI reports, as well as all the Power BI data sets. Now, the business, when we're in the corporate BI approach, are pure report consumers, so they cannot create their own Power BI reports or Power BI data sets. Then we have the second, IT-led self-service, and this is the starting phase of when we start to give some control back to the business, because now the business can go ahead and create their own Power BI reports. And the last phase that we have is business-led self-service. Now, this is where we give even further control to the business, because not only can they now create their own Power BI reports, but they can also go ahead and create their own Power BI data sets. Now, two very important factors before we get into the detail. When we transition from corporate BI to IT-led self-service, all the factors and the foundation that we've built during that corporate BI phase will not be dismissed. That will still be in the picture, and we will go through a little bit more later on the core principles that we're embedding during corporate BI and why it's so important to always have them in place. The second point worth making is business-led self-service. Yes, the third approach is business-led self-service, but I'm not suggesting that this is a mandatory approach. Now, moving to business-led self-service can actually cause more harm than good. We need to have the right use case to move maybe a team or a department to this approach. We might say, well, we're going to establish a small function in the organization with a few individuals who have the relevant skills and knowledge, and only they and they only will transition to business-led self-service. Or we can simply say, right now, no one in the organization will be transitioned to the last approach. And again, that is okay. So let's go ahead and get into the more detail. So again, we start off with corporate BI. So IT team or BI team have full control and ownership of all the Power BI items, both the reports as well as the data sets. But the big question here is why? Why should we start with corporate BI? Well, starting with corporate BI allows us to set the very important common objectives that we need early on in the process, such as scalability, usability, integrity, version control, and performance. So again, corporate BI, we're setting our foundation. So when you think of corporate BI, think of it as we're putting ourselves in the best possible position or setting ourselves up to be in the best possible position in order to finally transition to that self-service world, which is IT-led self-service. Now, a point worth making here, I've been to some organizations in the past, or I've had some conversations where I get the question from organizations saying, well, we've already passed corporate BI. We're actually already at IT-led self-service, so we can completely dismiss this phase. Yes, they are doing self-service in the organization, but also every department has their own mini data silo. Every department has their own processes, and they're still arguing against which numbers are correct. So again, the point of corporate BI is to pull everything back from the organization, get control of it, and then slowly afterwards, when we transition to IT-led self-service, we're then releasing it back to the business. Okay, but it's quite easy for me to sit here and say, well, we've heard of your issues, we've seen all your issues before, all you have to do, right, is move from corporate BI to IT-led self-service, and then possibly, if required, to business-led self-service. But instead, what we should, or a very important question here is, what factors should we consider, or what should we have in place before moving or transitioning to the IT-led self-service approach? And that is what we're going to go through now. The 10 factors to consider before moving to IT-led self-service. Now, one point worth making here, the factors that we're going to go through can be seen as a checklist essentially, but also we do not have to have all these factors in place for a very long period of time and have everything mature, because the longer we delay moving to IT-led self-service, the more the chance the business will start taking matters into their own hands and start sourcing data from various different places, mashing it together, and then of course reporting on this data, right? So we do not want to delay it too much, but all the factors, we should have certainly started the process of putting them in place. So the first factor to consider before moving to IT-led self-service is executive support. Now, we will be going through a process that is very much hated and very much unwanted, and that there is the process of change. Now, in the past, I've been involved in many bottom-up approaches, and even though we achieved some level of success by rolling out 1 or 2 Power BI solutions, by completing some projects, but the overall rollout was not complete. Now, what is required is that top-down approach. We need the presence, the involvement of your C-level director, executive sponsorship. And the reason for this is the communication needs to come from the top bottom. And what that does, it makes sure everyone is on the same path. It makes sure that everyone in the business is working towards the same objectives. Now, various different people from different areas of the organization will all have their day-to-day responsibilities, their own objectives, departmental objectives. So having this communication coming consistently top-down ensures everyone remembers that the objective here is to roll out Power BI. The second factor we should consider is data integrity. Now, there is no better way to stop an adoption of a new platform than that same platform giving out incorrect information. And this is why it's so important to pull back and start with a corporate BI approach. Here, the BI team are responsible for creating the Power BI datasets as well as the Power BI reports, and they do have the relevant knowledge and the relevant skills to create solutions that are of a high level data integrity. And again, why is this so important? It allows us to build that very important layer of trust between the business and the data. And if we do not build this layer of trust early on now, when we're in the corporate BI phase, we certainly won't build it when we move to the environment where the business start creating their own reports and even further down the line, possibly their own data sets. But another very important reason to have data integrity early on is because it sets a level or a standard of quality that needs to be achieved. Now, what I found from my experience is many individuals from the organization who are creating their own reports. So these are the report author champions. That's the status that they get, and we'll talk about that as we go through the slides. But many of these individuals always look back at the corporate Power BI reports that have been designed and developed by the BI team in order to validate their own numbers. So by ensuring we have a high level of quality early on means when we do move to the space of self-service, that level of quality will be reflected and mirrored, and should be reflected and mirrored in the reports that are constructed by the business. Okay, the third factor, the BICC, Business Intelligence Competency Center. Now, I just want to reiterate again, we don't have to have the BICC established and matured for a long period of time, but we should have certainly started the process of creating the BICC function, finding the people who will be attending, and ensuring that is in place, right? Now, the purpose of the BICC is essentially to promote the use of business intelligence and Power BI throughout the organization, and to also ensure there is some level of data governance around everything, right? And it also ensures that everyone, including the business as well as IT, are fully aware of the BI strategy in place, and also the various different Power BI capabilities that exist and can be used by the business. Furthermore, the BICC, through its many benefits, will essentially smoothen the path into the world of self-service, and also increase, and it can increase, the success rate of successfully adopting Power BI into the business. Okay, so we got the fourth factor. So now that we have established and we started the process, of our BICC, it's very important to find the individuals who will be creating the reports. And that only makes sense, right? Because we're moving to IT-led self-service, so we need to find the right people to be creating reports for the business. And these individuals have the status of being the report author champions. Now, the core responsibility of the report author champion is firstly to promote the use of business of Power BI throughout the organization to get everyone excited, but also it is for them to publish reports. So every report author champion will have a Power BI Pro license that not only enables them to create Power BI reports in Power BI Desktop, but also allows them to publish these reports up to the Power BI workspace. And what does this mean? It means that the reports that they put in place can then be accessed by a wider audience in the business. So again, they do have an important responsibility. A common question I usually get, how do we identify the report author champions? Who will be good candidates to put forward for the report author champion? Well, there's a variety of ways we can actually go about this. Firstly, we can maybe ask different representatives from around the organization in the right departments to maybe nominate a candidate that they think will be best fitted. Or what we can do instead, we can pay really close attention early on in the process to those who are asking many questions about Power BI, right? Think about the individuals who are submitting tickets about Power BI. Think about the individuals who are coming to your desks and asking various different questions. Why does Power BI work like this? How can we do this in Power BI? These people here are essentially, or can be seen as, early adopters. They're self-motivated and curious to learn about Power BI themselves, right? So they will be great candidates to put forward to get the status of report author champion. And again, these people generally are like gold dust in the business because we're not going to find lots of them. So let's make sure we bring them on. And another way we can identify report author champions is by looking at the report usage logs behind every Power BI report. Again, we started in the corporate BI approach, meaning the BI team would have started the process of designing and developing some Power BI reports. And behind every Power BI report is a usage log. Let's look into these logs. Let's identify which users from around the organization are most frequently accessing them on a daily basis. Again, they're self-motivated, they're curious. They will be great candidates to push forward Power BI and to learn Power BI and to start creating Power BI reports for the business. Okay, so now that we've identified our report author champions, the next thing we need to make sure we have in place is the relevant amount of training for these individuals to be able to do the job that we're requesting, right? So as they're going to be creating reports, we need to make sure they feel comfortable navigating around Power BI desktop, which is the application where they will be creating Power BI reports. We need to make sure they know how to use different visuals and which visual to use in which context. And also, we need to make sure these individuals understand how to publish a report from Power BI desktop up into the Power BI service and into the correct workspace, and possibly even to promote it from a workspace to an app, right? But again, ensuring that these people have the correct amount of training means accurate reports going out to the business. Therefore, the business will trust the report author champions and will be directing questions to the report author champions. Another reason why we should give the report author champions the right amount of training, it keeps the report author champions motivated, and that there is very important. We are asking for the report author champions to be creating Power BI reports. If they attempt to do this and they haven't been given the relevant amount of skills and the relevant amount of knowledge, they will get overwhelmed and they will get demotivated. And then afterwards, the consequence is they can start distributing incorrect reports to the business. And another reason why we should give the relevant amount of training, it eases the pressure off the BI team, because again, more questions will be directed to the report author champions. So now the BI team has more time to innovate and maybe possibly look into other areas of data analysis that can benefit the organization as well. Okay, we then have the data dictionary. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the data dictionary, but fundamentally we're moving to self-service. So we need to make sure everyone is talking the same language. Whether you are a developer in the BI team, whether you are a report author, or whether you're a report consumer simply accessing the reports, we need to make sure that all these individuals are using the same terms and the same definition when working with Power BI, right? So all the metrics, all the descriptive attributes, let's give them a data dictionary in order for them to be able to access and understand the terms or definitions behind all the attributes being used. So again, this comes down to removing any ambiguity. The seventh factor. So I briefly mentioned this before, but it's certainly worth reiterating as a factor that we should do before moving to IT-led. And that is, we will not be moving the whole organization at once. We need to select that single team department in the business and only move them. Build a success criteria around this as well. That way, when we move another department, we have identified some issues and we've put solutions against these issues. Absolutely. When going through in the process in the past, what I find is departments do have different challenges. However, you will find some common challenges across all areas of the business. Another important question that's usually raised here as well is, how do we know which area of the business we should migrate first, or should be early adopters of Power BI and go into the self-service space? Well, in order to understand this, the sort of questions that we should be asking ourselves are, what are the most critical business objectives currently? And then also understanding which department or team will contribute the most to these business objectives if they get Power BI early on in the process, and if they can create Power BI reports themselves early on in the process. So these are the sort of questions we should be asking ourselves. How do we get the most return on investment with which department? Okay. So we then move to the 8th factor. Now, this is very important, and this is overseen in many occasions. Now, the success rate of rolling out Power BI is not determined by the number of projects or Power BI solutions that are put in place, but it certainly is determined by the number of report consumers that start using Power BI and accept Power BI. So they're a very important group that we certainly need to give enough focus to. Now, how should we do this? There are various ways, but we can certainly start off by setting up some lunch and learns, and let's make sure we make them interactive and fun to attend. Also, we can put some workshops in place, right? Apart from that, another good thing we can do for the report consumers is maybe build an internal portal that only hosts information directed to report consumers. Now, you're probably thinking, well, there's a wealth of information online about Power BI. Yes, however, report consumers are not the super technical people, and more importantly, they don't care about how do we create a star schema. The report consumers don't care on how can we optimize our DAX or anything related to the back end of Power BI, so Power Pivot or Power Query. They just want to understand, how do I access my Power BI report? When I'm in my Power BI report, how do I drill down? How do I export to Excel? How do I apply a slicer? So let's get all this information and add it in an internal portal and give the report consumers access to this, rather than sending them on a fishing trip through a wealth of information online, and that they will be overwhelming and essentially demotivate them and can even possibly make them revert back to the previous tools that they've been using for long periods of time. We have the 9th factor, the champion exam. So we should put in place some sort of mini maybe or multiple choice exam to have for all those report consumers who would want to become report author champions. Because as we go through the process, you will have people coming more and more and saying, hey, I want to learn Power BI. I want to be able to create my own reports for my own department or for my own team, right? So what this exam does, it creates a sense of importance, a sense of certification within the business as well. But furthermore, what it also does, it adds a benchmark of quality that needs to be achieved in what skills and knowledge you must have in order to get the status of report author champion. Because again, we don't want anyone and everyone in the organization developing their own Power BI reports that can be published to the service and then accessed by a wider audience. So again, having this exam in place builds up the momentum, excites people to jump on board, and also ensures the report author champions that come in later on into the business do understand the core concepts that are needed to create Power BI reports as well. Okay, so we now arrived at the 10th factor we should consider before moving to IT-led, and what this is keep Excel. Now, what do I mean by this? We should not go into an organization and start pulling the plug of every other application currently being used. Now, as I mentioned early on, we're going through this process of change. Now, this process of change can be scary, especially for those individuals who have been using another application for the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. They've been doing the same process for a very, very long time. So even though we know the great benefits that Power BI can bring, for them, it's just a scary change. So what we should be doing is we should be talking to the report consumers and understanding what their worries are. Now, in the past, I've experienced scenarios where the report consumers were pushing back against Power BI. And what was really funny was that when we sat down with these report consumers and genuinely listened to them and understood why they were pushing back against Power BI, it was because Power BI didn't have the capabilities that they're currently using now. And again, the funny thing here is that Power BI always had the capabilities that they are using now and need, right? So it's about communicating to the report consumers that not only can Power BI help them do the job that they're doing now, but also Power BI can help them or assist them even further in their day-to-day work activities. So those there are the 10 factors that we should be considering before moving to IT-led self-service. And again, as I mentioned before, just to reiterate it, everything doesn't have to be in place for a very, very long time. We don't want to delay it by too much. So then, we arrived in IT-led self-service. Now, I just want to point our attention to the image here. Before, when we started with corporate BI, we saw the green foundation, and the green foundation had all the business objectives, right? Or the BI objectives, the common BI objectives that are important and we should embed. That foundation is still in place. What we started to do now, we started to build the walls on top of it and we added the door, and that symbolizes the entrance into the self-service world. Now, another important point to raise here, why should we be transitioning to self-service? Well, firstly, it gives quicker answers to business questions, which in this day and age is absolutely vital. Furthermore, as I mentioned before, it does take some tension off the BI team to explore other areas, but also what I've seen in the past is if you restrict the business from not having self-service, there is a possibility that that can be the start of a data silo culture. The business will find other ways to source data in order for them to answer their business questions faster than it takes to submit a ticket back to the BI team and for the BI team to then respond back with the appropriate report. So,
sorry, Laz, quickly. Do you want to take some questions now as they come, or do you want to leave them till the end?
Happy to leave them in the end. So I planned 15 minutes, I think, to 10 minutes at the end. So happy just to go through all them then.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah?
Yep, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Rishi. Okay. So now that we've arrived to IT-led self-service, the next possible question is, how do we transition to the world of business-led self-service if we have to, right? And that's what we're going to go through now. We will be going through the 3 factors to consider before moving to business-led self-service. Now, the first one is review. All the previous factors or considerations that we just went through, we need to make sure they are functioning. There's no point of moving to business-led self-service where the business can now go ahead and create their own Power BI data sets when we're having some challenges in the now, which is the business creating their own Power BI reports. All this will do, it will enhance those issues and create more challenges around the organization, right? So think back to all the other 10 factors. Is the BICC functioning? Are people attending, whether it was a weekly or bi-weekly catch-up? Let's look at the report author champions. Are they creating Power BI reports? Are these Power BI reports being used by the report consumers around the business. Let's look at the report usage logs and get a better understanding. Let's maybe send out a mini survey or simply talk to various different report consumers and see how they feel so far about Power BI. Also, data dictionary, is it still in place? All these factors should be considered before moving to the next phase. Also, the same process as we went through before, BICC champions again, but this time we need to find the dataset designer champion as we're moving to the place where the business needs to create their own Power BI datasets. It only makes sense, right? And another common question here is, well, how do we identify these individuals? We can go ahead and ask the question in the BICC now and ask different representatives who attended BICC to maybe nominate someone, or we can pinpoint the highest performing report authors and see and ask them whether they do want to be upskilled to have a little bit more knowledge in regards to building Power BI datasets, or of course we can onboard someone in order to bridge the gap between business and IT and start creating Power BI datasets as well. Now, as we've identified the data design champions, a very important factor also is we need to make sure that the right knowledge and skills are held by these individuals. Now, creating a Power BI dataset and publishing it to the service, which is then accessible by various different report authors, can do much damage. As I mentioned at the start, there's no need to move to business-led self-service unless we have a very, very good case for it. But if the dataset designers start creating datasets and publish to the service, and that dataset there is not built correctly or has a low level of integrity, report authors can access it, and any reports that they start to develop from these datasets will essentially be sharing incorrect numbers. So we need to consider the training that these dataset design champions need to have. Previously, we spoke about accessing Power BI desktop, feeling confident in using it, using different visuals in the correct context. But as you can see from the slide here, there are a variety of other skills and knowledge that the data designer should have. Maybe it's not a single data designer that holds all of this. Maybe it's spread across 2 or 3, right? But again, data modeling, DAX, using Power Query, which is the data transformation aspect of Power BI, these are skills that our data design champions must have. Okay, so those are the 3 factors to consider before moving to the world of business-led self-service. So we've now arrived to business-led, and we're probably thinking, hooray, that's it, we're done. But that's not the case. From here onward, it will be a continuous process moving forward. So what we're going to explore now are what factors should we be continuously keeping in mind to keep the wheels rolling and ensure an overall rollout and success rate. So the 3 factors which are a continuous process is, again, review, review, review. So the 10 factors, I'm not going to repeat them again, but let's make sure the BICC is in place, report authors are happy, report consumers are using reports, but also the previous 3 factors we just considered, from IT-led self-service to business-led self-service, let's also make sure those there are functioning and are working. So the data designers are happy, receiving the training. When they publish Power BI datasets up to the service, are they being used? Let's look at the Office 365 audit logs and see how they're being accessed as well. The second factor that we should consider is ensuring that we are taking transformations that have been done in Power BI by the dataset designer champions and migrating them back to the underlying source, right? Now, this reduces the amount of resources required to process and import dataset, but it also increases the query performance if we are using a direct query connectivity type in Power BI. So it takes much longer to load all data into memory and then apply transformations on top of that, rather than simply do the transformations in the underlying data source and simply load the ready data back into Power BI. So to give a bit more information about this, we have our dataset designers, they open up Power BI desktop. Now they can go ahead and connect to the primary data source, which is great. However, they then went ahead and joined maybe or ingested data from a web analytics platform that in the organization, and maybe a CSV file, maybe to pull in some budget data that's not available in the underlying primary data source. So then they merged all this data, appended this data, derived various different columns from this in Power BI. These are the things that we should be taking and pushing them back down to the underlying source. Now, a very common question that we get here is, okay, but we are moving to self-service. We are easing the tension off the BI team. Surely, if now we have to continuously take all the transformations that data designers are doing and pushing them back to underlying source will take up a lot of time and resource. That is right, and what we should be doing is prioritizing which transformations should be taken back to the underlying data source. And the way we do this is by, again, looking at the usage logs of which data sets are highly being used around the organization. Let's also identify, okay, on top of these data sets, which reports are being used? How frequently are they being used? Let's raise it as a question in the BICC. So again, those reports that are pointing to these data sets that are used by a very large volume of people in the business are the type of transformations we want to put back to the primary data source. And then the third factor that we should be considering when moving to whilst we're in the process of business-led self-service is to ensure that we have some form of testing in place. We need to establish a process. We just mentioned about moving transformations back. So let's make sure that we have got a process that involves the relevant Power BI dataset designer, that involves the relevant report author champion and the relevant report consumer. That way, when these transformations are pushed back and then they get rebuilt, we have got the same numbers being displayed and there's no surprises to the business. Again, this is just to ensure that no trust is lost between the business and the data. So those are the three factors that we should be continuously keeping in mind when we arrive to business-led self-service as well. Okay, so we now understand the various different issues, and we also understand the Power BI deployment approaches that we should follow to try and reduce these. So let's look into some of the technical considerations, and what we're going to do here, we're going to look at the capabilities that make Power BI an enterprise-ready platform, and we're also going to look at some questions we should be asking ourselves. First things first, Power BI was not always an enterprise-ready platform. Now, even though it uses the analysis services engine underneath it, so it has a deep integration with AES, Power BI was seen more as the self-service tool to be used by analysts, whilst analysis services was seen more as the enterprise tool to be used by BI professionals. So with that said, Power BI was not seen as a centralized version of the truth, only a self-service tool, hence analysis services was favored in many cases. However, that was all in the past. What we are seeing more and more and more are all those missed capabilities in Power BI that were in analysis services are now coming to Power BI. And especially through Power BI Premium, what we're finding is Power BI essentially becoming an analysis services superset. So that's what we're going to explore now. We're going to explore some of the capabilities that make Power BI an enterprise-ready platform. Okay, the first is, previously Power BI was not a single version of the truth. So we have this Power BI dataset that we've created, and we created a model in it. So what we went ahead and did was we went ahead and published this up to the finance workspace, and everything works great, right? We now have the finance team happy. They have all the reports that are sourcing data from this data set. But then we have the finance executives who have their own separate workspace who also needed to create reports from this data set. Now, what we previously had to do was we had to go ahead and duplicate this across two separate workspaces, right? And of course, the challenges that this introduced was using resources unnecessarily and also maintenance in two places. However, with shared data sets coming into play, Power BI is now that centralized version of the truth. You can create a single Power BI dataset, put it to the finance workspace, as this example shows, and then create reports in the finance executive workspace, and that dataset does not get duplicated. So what we can do essentially is have one workspace with one centralized version of the truth, and then many workspaces with different reports with different areas of the business sourcing from that one place. Also, previously, Power BI was seen, or a Power BI dataset was seen as a closed model. Now, what do I mean by this? The only thing that we could connect to Power BI datasets was Power BI Desktop and Excel. However, with XMLA endpoints being enabled, this is no longer the case. And remember, Power BI uses the analysis services engine underneath it. So it was always there, but it has now been enabled. And what this means, it means not only can we connect to a Power BI dataset through Excel and Power BI Desktop, but we can also use debugging tools such as DAX Studio. We can also use data management tools such as SQL Server Management Studio. And if we wanted, we could even use other BI vendor applications. So Power BI now is an open model, as analysis services always was, which we can use various applications to connect to. Also in the past, Power BI did not support incremental refresh, which is important for an enterprise-ready platform. Now, with analysis services, we always had partitions. So what we could do, we could load only we could only process a frame of data. But in Power BI, if we had a model which was 8 GB, we simply had to refresh this model every time, right? And of course, that was not very efficient. But with incremental refresh coming into play, we now have the ability to do exactly what we did with AS, but through a user interface through Power BI Desktop and connected to the Power BI service. And the benefits that this brings is faster refreshes, right? We have less data that we are refreshing. It also meant more reliable refreshes, as we have less time needing to be connected to the underlying data source, but also less resources being consumed, because again, we're working with a smaller volume of data. Okay, we then have paginated reports. Now, this is not comparable to analysis services, but as we're going through the features that make Power BI an enterprise-ready platform now, I thought it was certainly worth mentioning this. Now, in the past, we wanted to have the ability to create those operational PDF type print-ready reports as we can in reporting services, but also to be able to host these alongside our standard Power BI reports, which are more interactive, dynamic for data discovery, and host them together in the same environment. So for instance, in the service. And with Microsoft Power BI Report Builder, we can now do exactly that. Okay, a bit conscious of time, so I'll speed through it a little bit more. We then have aggregations and composite models, right? So previously, Power BI could not handle large volumes of data. However, with composite models and aggregation tables, this is no longer the case. Even with premium or purchasing a Power BI premium capacity, removing the 1 GB cap in memory that can be used with a Pro license, we still needed more volumes of data. So we have an import connectivity type, which is very common. It imports all the data into memory, and it's super fast for the report consumer and also for the report author as well. However, it is possible to reach the max memory capacity if we're dealing with very, very large volumes of data. That's fine. We can then jump to direct query instead. And when we use direct query now, we're not loading any data into memory, but instead what we're doing, we're simply storing the metadata. So when a user interacts with a visual in Power BI, it simply sends a query to the underlying data source, which is usually a relational source, and then returns the data back to be rendered on screen. However, this can give some slower performances. So with that said, we have composite models in play, right? So we have those large volume tables as direct queries, so not storing data in memory, and we have our more static tables in import mode. But one more thing to mention here, as I said, with direct query, we can experience some slower performances, right? And now this is when composite models and aggregation tables go hand in hand, because we can create that sales aggregation table as we do any other table, which essentially is a grouped by of location and calendar. That way, if a user interacts with a report or a visual report that possibly shows an attribute from locations such as postcode and by calendar such as month, Power BI will automatically redirect them down to the sales aggregation table rather than the original sales table, which is in direct query mode. Okay, so those are the Power BI capabilities, or some of the Power BI capabilities. There's so many more, such as data flows we could have mentioned, but those are just some that make Power BI the enterprise-ready tool it is today. Now, I just want to finish up on the last question, which is vital when we're going through the process of rolling out Power BI at the enterprise, and that there is, how do we know which Power BI premium capacity we should purchase? To make one point to make very clear though, there is no exact science or the best way to choose which premium capacity we can or should buy. What we should do though is try to buy enough resource to cover our peak usage. So let's go through some of the questions. We firstly have, how big will our datasets be? Now, we need to ensure we have enough memory to host our dataset in memory when being used, also for when it's being refreshed, and also for any incoming queries. So to make some sense of this, we have report A, B, and C. Report C has been published to the Power BI service and it's 3 gigabytes. So we have 3 gigabytes that are being consumed. But we need to make sure we have enough memory also for refresh and user queries. So the rule of thumb is to multiply our dataset by 2.5. Again, this is only to ensure we have enough memory in place to cover our peak usage. So when a refresh occurs in Power BI takes a duplicate of that dataset and refreshes it in the background and then simply replaces it once it's done. But also what we need to make sure is we have enough memory for any incoming queries or for any measures requesting any memory. The second question, concurrent refreshes. Now with concurrent refreshes, what we need to make sure is we're planning to have enough that can run at the same time. And this is something that's usually overseen. So in this example, I'm using a P1 capacity that we can have 6 concurrent refreshes. So let's go ahead, 6 concurrent refreshes on Monday morning, then we trigger another 2 data sets. What Power BI will do, it will put these in a waiting zone essentially, and only when other data sets are finished refreshing will they be replaced and then be triggered to continue the refresh process. So again, what we're highlighting here is let's make sure we keep this in mind and understand how many data sets we need to be refreshing at once. Now the next question we should be asked.
There's 5 minutes left. I don't know if you want to take some questions. How much more we got on the content? This is great, by the way. But
No, I got 2 more points to raise. I'm going to be on afterwards as well, Rishi. I'm happy to stay on past 8 p.m. In order to answer any questions then. But let me just finish up on this final point now. In regards to this final point, we need to make sure we understand whether using an import, live connection, or direct query. And the reason for doing that essentially is depending on which connectivity type we'll be using, we will need to plan for memory and virtual cores for import, and then also queries per second for live connection and direct query. So I'm going to speed through the last one. And the last one we have is understanding how many read-only users we will have. understanding the split between pro users, frequent users, and occasional users will give us a better understanding of how many nodes we need to purchase through the Power BI Premium capacity. So apologies for having to speed up through the last two, but yes, I'm happy to take some questions now. In that case, Rishi, or pushing for the end.
Yeah, I think it's good to have them whilst we have the session, so it's fresh in people's minds. So
yeah, no, absolutely.
If we go back to the factors for leading from enterprise to IT self-service, you had 10 factors there. Are they all of equal importance, or is there kind of a ranking between these? If you can't do all of them, I suppose, which ones would you focus on?
Let me go back to all of them. I wouldn't say there's one that is of, they all have their own weight in regards to how important they are, but in regards to some that we certainly should start the process of, for example, having that BICC in place, we should certainly have started the process for that, ensuring the report consumers are receiving the relevant amount of training, ensuring that data integrity is in place, also is something vital. If I had to say to push some of these factors back, it would be maybe the champion exam to push further back a little bit. Also, another thing might be the data dictionary, because again, the only reason I say to push back the data dictionary a little bit, if we had to pick and choose a few of these, is only because we're doing that incremental self-service. So we can maintain that everyone who are moving up at that point in time understands the terms and definitions should be used. But fundamentally, I wouldn't say there's no priority over which ones we should take. Ideally, they should all have some level of focus.
Yep, agreed. And there's another question that came through, which was on my mind actually through a lot of the presentation, which is a lot of the clients I work with actually, they've got Office 365 E5, so they've got Power BI Pro licenses for tens of thousands of people. So everyone's got a Power BI Pro license. And actually, it's kind of how Power BI starts a lot as well, with the grassroots level, and people build their own stuff, and that's how it really gets adoption.
Yeah.
Unlike some of the older tools which were corporate BI led. So in that scenario where you've got an organization where they've already given Power BI Pro to everyone, or where you've got lots of activity, lots of self-service BI activity going on already, what would be your approach then to try and put some governance around it?
Yeah.
So to go the other way around.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So yeah, let's take that scenario. We have E5 licenses, so everyone, all the 10,000 users, let's say, in the organization can design and publish their own reports, right? One very important fact I should have made more clear is when we're saying that only the report authors or the report author champions can go ahead and publish their reports to the service, this does not mean that we're going to completely restrict everyone else in the organization from creating their own reports. What it means is that only these individuals will be able to publish reports that are up in the workspaces that are corporate workspaces, right? So it can be the case where we have other individuals in the organization creating their own Power BI reports and publishing them, but then we will have that golden suite of workspaces in Power BI that, again, only the relevant people can go ahead and publish into them as well. And separate from that there, the dataset designers, when we're creating the data sets, with certified data sets being enabled in Power BI, that's another thing we should take in order to ensure that the report consumers and their authors using these data sets understand, again, the ones that have been certified by the BI team. Hopefully that answers the question, Rishi.
I think that does, yeah. Thank you. I mean, I don't know who posted it, was anonymous, but hopefully that answers the question. But actually, just on that as well, just to follow up. So one of the things that I've suggested as well is, use your premium capacity as that kind of golden suite, right? So, to have all your enterprise ones, your important ones, kind of have that as, only certain people can publish to those, or, put stuff into premium capacity, and have your shared capacity as a bit more of a self-service. That's another way to kind of get around that way. You've got hundreds of workspaces already created, and you can't go and delete them all, and you wouldn't want to.
Absolutely. You raised a very valid point there as well. With premium, we shouldn't forget that we still have access to our shared capacity, right? And essentially, we can take those priority workspaces for different areas of the organization and have those only premium. So yeah, totally agree on that.
Yeah. because with the premium ones also you can monitor those a lot more closely. You can see, you know, how your memory's being used, how your, you know, CPU's been used, and actually you don't want to chuck everything on there. Your performance will just fall off a cliff if you do that. So it's
that's,
you know,
right.
you want,
a common misperception
really,
of
Yeah, lots of people buy premium and they think, and they thought they hope it'll give them better performance, but and they end up getting worse performance. So absolutely. So that's where it's a good idea, I think, to try and use some of these tools to balance it. There's a couple more questions, but actually what I'll do, let me publish these questions so you can see them, and then you can go through the list because you can see the Q&A, right, Laz?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see the Q&A, okay. So I'll publish them and I'll make sure to answer them.
And actually, do you know what? I can, some of these actually I'm going to pick up in some of mine. So my topic I've actually done quite similar to Laz's, and this was intentional. So I'm going to cover a little bit around governance as well, because just on the context of kind of the internal and external sharing, which is what I'm doing. So let me put my camera on. I realize you guys can't actually see me. Is that better? Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, should I kick off then?